A Real Madrid player left training in a wheelchair this week. Not because of an injury from a match, but because his own teammate punched him. And this is all happening just 6 days before World Cup 2026 squads are announced.
I mean, it is the kind of headline that just, it forces you to refresh your screen 3 times just to make sure you have not stumbled onto a parody account.
Truly.
Yeah.
It is nuts. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way, because we are looking at something completely unprecedented today.
Yeah, we are.
You are joining us as we open up an internal, highly classified research dossier. This is dated May 7, 2026. So to be clear, this is not just a collection of random internet rumors, right?
Right. No, this is a verified minute-by-minute chronicle of a total institutional meltdown, and it is happening at the biggest football club in the world, Real Madrid.
Exactly. And our mission today is to unpack this wild dressing room war. We need to separate the concrete facts from the swirling rumors and really explore exactly how a club-level crisis of this magnitude could send literal shockwaves through the upcoming World Cup.
Because the World Cup is right around the corner.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this, because the sheer scale of the chaos here, it requires a serious forensic breakdown.
Definitely. So to orient you to the situation, let us look at the pieces on the board. We have 2 main combatants here.
Right.
On one side, we have Federico Valverde. He is the 27-year-old Uruguayan midfield dynamo. And crucially, he is the vice captain of Real Madrid.
That vice captain detail is huge.
It is massive. And then on the other side, you have Aurélien Tchouameni. He is the 25-year-old French national team anchor, their defensive midfield stalwart. So we are talking about 2 absolutely vital world-class players.
Yeah, these are not fringe guys.
Exactly. And they are colliding right at the intersection of 2 massive pressure points. First, you have an impending winner-takes-all El Clásico match against Barcelona coming up on Sunday, May 11th.
Which is already intense enough on its own.
Right. But second, you have the looming shadow of the 2026 World Cup. National squad announcements are literally days away. What's fascinating here is the sheer concentration of pressure. We are watching a slow-motion car crash where the passengers are the elite of the elite in global sports.
Yeah, that is a great way to put it, because to understand how a routine Wednesday turns into a hospital visit, you really have to understand the specific environment these 2 men are operating in.
Totally.
We're looking at a verified 48-hour timeline taking place at Valdebebas. And for those who might not know, Valdebebas is not just like a local practice field.
No, not at all.
It is a multi-million-dollar, highly secluded, state-of-the-art training complex. It is supposed to be a sanctuary for these players.
Yeah.
A place entirely shielded from the media and the fans.
It is their safe zone.
Exactly. So when a war breaks out inside the sanctuary, it means the entire system has failed. Let us trace this back to the actual spark. Wednesday, May 6.
Right. So the initial inciting incident on Wednesday actually masquerades as something incredibly mundane. We are talking about a standard training drill foul.
Just a foul.
Yeah, just a regular foul. If you have ever played or watched any level of competitive sports, these happen every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Professional football clubs train with immense intensity.
Right, guys are fighting for starting spots, tackles, flying.
Exactly. Someone gets clipped, someone goes down. The standard protocol is, a quick apology, maybe a frustrated hand wave, and then you just jog back to your position.
Yeah, you shake it off.
But the psychological mechanism at play here is that a foul is only just a foul if the relationship between the players is stable. If the relationship is fractured, a late tackle ceases to be an accident. It becomes a message.
Oh, okay. And clearly, a message was received here, because this foul between Valverde and Tchouameni escalated instantly.
Oh, instantly.
The reporting from Marca describes it as, quote, one of the most heated exchanges ever seen at Valdebebas. And think about that. Valdebebas has housed some of the biggest egos in the history of the sport over the last 2 decades.
Yeah, they have seen it all.
But we are talking about physical shoving, right there on the grass, in full view of the coaching staff and the rest of the squad. And it does not even stay on the pitch. The argument spills directly into the locker room. Teammates physically have to step in and pry them apart.
Just to stop it from getting worse.
Right. Now, it is crucial to note that on this first day, on Wednesday, there was no hospital visit.
Correct.
It was ugly, it was aggressive, but on paper, it was just a severe training ground bust-up.
Yeah, but day 1 serves as the ultimate diagnostic test for the health of a club's culture. In a functional ecosystem, this is the exact moment leadership exerts control.
Right, the manager steps in.
Exactly. A competent manager pulls both players into a private office immediately. You bring in the senior leadership group, the club captain, the veteran players, and you mediate. You force them to air the grievances, you establish boundaries, and you do not let them leave the facility until the air is totally cleared.
But, as the dossier shows, heading into day 2, the air was not cleared.
No, it was weaponized.
Which brings us to Thursday, May 7, the escalation. I mean, you would naturally assume that giving 2 grown men 24 hours to cool off at home would lower the temperature.
You would think so, yeah.
Instead, the psychological warfare begins the second they walk back into the building on Thursday. The reports from Marca and AS confirm that at the very start of Thursday's training session, Valverde point-blank refuses to shake Tchouaméni's hand.
And we really need to dissect the anatomy of that handshake refusal, because in the micro-society of a football club, the morning handshake is not just a polite, casual greeting.
Right, it is expected.
It is an automated daily ritual. It is a social contract that acknowledges mutual respect regardless of your personal feelings. Breaking that automation requires conscious, burning resentment.
It is not an accident.
Exactly. It is not a heat-of-the-moment reaction like a shove after a bad tackle. It is entirely premeditated. By refusing the handshake in front of the rest of the squad, Valverde is explicitly broadcasting a message to the entire room. He is saying the conflict is active, the grievance is unresolved, and I do not recognize this man as an ally.
Wow. And that forces every other player in the room to tense up, waiting for the other shoe to drop.
100%.
I mean, just imagine the atmospheric pressure in that room. Think about a time you had a deeply toxic dynamic with a coworker, where even just passing them in the hallway made your stomach drop. Now imagine having to go out onto a pitch and rely on that exact person to anticipate your every movement in a high-speed, physically demanding sport.
It is an impossible working environment.
Right. And this is where the management intervention comes into play. Enter Álvaro Arbeloa, the interim manager. He looks at this deeply hostile standoff between his vice captain and his star defensive midfielder, and his grand solution. He decides the best way to fix the tension is to put Valverde and Tchouaméni on the exact same training team for the day's tactical drills.
Yeah, the underlying theory there is forced cooperation. The manager assumes that if you make them pass to each other, if you make them rely on each other to win the small-sided games, the shared objective will override the personal animosity.
Like they will just forget about it.
Right. He thinks they will supposedly realize they're wearing the same badge and just snap out of it.
Wait, hold on. I have a brother. I know exactly what it's like to harbor irrational, fiery anger towards someone. This managerial tactic sounds exactly like that terrible parenting strategy where you force 2 fighting siblings to wear the same oversized get-along sweater.
The shared shirt punishment.
Exactly. And you make them sit on the couch together. It never brings peace. It just traps 2 furious people in a confined space until someone gets pinched when the parent turns their back.
That is a very accurate analogy.
As someone who analyzes team dynamics, walk me through this. Is there any psychological universe where Arbeloa's tactic makes sense, or is this just pure, unadulterated delusion?
It leans heavily toward delusion, mostly due to a complete misreading of the emotional stakes here. Look, forced proximity can be an effective tool, but only under highly specific conditions.
Like when?
Well, if it is early in the preseason, or if the conflict stems from a purely tactical disagreement, say one player thinks the other is not tracking back enough on defense, then forcing them to work together can actually bridge the gap.
Okay, that makes sense.
But this was not tactical. It had become deeply personal. And more importantly, it was happening in the crucible of a collapsing season, which we will get into shortly. When a team's baseline anxiety is already redlining, proximity does not breed teamwork. It breeds provocation.
Right, because they are just looking for excuses to reignite the fight.
Precisely. According to reports from RMC Sport and The Athletic, putting them on the same team acted as a highly combustible accelerant. It kept them constantly in each other's orbit.
Which means they had to talk to each other.
They had to communicate, yes. Which meant every shout for a pass, every critique of a movement, carried the venom of the previous day's altercation. They were essentially relitigating the original foul under the guise of training instructions.
Wow.
It was a spectacular miscalculation by Arbeloa. He thought he was building a bridge, but he was actually just locking 2 heavyweights in a phone booth.
And the bell rings for the final round the second they get off the pitch. Because the post-training fallout in the dressing room is where this pivots from a juicy sports tabloid story to a legitimate medical emergency.
It escalates so fast.
They head back inside. The physical exhaustion of the training session is totally mixed with the boiling emotional tension of Arbeloa's failed experiment. And then Valverde throws a massive, room-silencing accusation. He accuses Tchouaméni of leaking the story of their Wednesday fight to the Spanish press.
And you have to understand, paranoia is the ultimate hallmark of a dying dressing room. When a team is failing on the pitch, trust evaporates off it. Every headline becomes a suspect.
Anyone can be the mole.
Exactly. Valverde clearly woke up, read the morning papers, saw the intricate details of a scuffle that happened behind the closed doors of Valdebebas, and concluded that Tchouaméni was the mole trying to win the public relations war.
Right.
Now, according to Diary AS, Tchouaméni vehemently denies this accusation. But you have to view this through the lens of human psychology. When someone is cornered by a serious accusation regarding their professional integrity, especially in front of 30 of their peers,
The fight or flight kicks in,
the primal fight-or-flight response takes over entirely.
and Tchouaméni chose fight. He feels cornered, the accusations are flying, the adrenaline is surging, and the climax is violent. Tchouaméni throws a punch.
A real punch?
He connects, and he knocks Federico Valverde, a heavily muscled elite athlete, straight to the ground.
This is where we have to strip away the sports context and look at the physical reality of the environment. A locker room is an incredibly dangerous place to have a physical altercation.
It is full of hazards.
Exactly. It is not a boxing ring with a canvas floor. It is full of hard, unforgiving surfaces, tiled floors, metal lockers, heavy wooden benches, and medical tables. When Valverde goes down from the sheer force of the punch, he does not just stumble, he hits his head on a table.
Oh, man.
The situation instantly transforms from bruised egos to a potential trauma case.
Right, because the collision opens up a cut on Valverde's head that is severe enough to require immediate stitches. But the cut is actually the least of their worries. RMC Sport reports, and this is later corroborated by Cadena SCR, that Valverde suffered a brief loss of consciousness.
Which is terrifying.
He was knocked out cold on the locker room floor.
And a reported loss of consciousness triggers an entirely different tier of medical protocol. The club doctors can no longer just treat the laceration. They have to assume potential traumatic brain injury.
They have to be careful.
They have to immediately stabilize his cervical spine, check his pupillary response, and escalate to emergency hospital care. You do not mess around with a knockout blow to the head, regardless of how it happened. Which explains the shocking visual that leaked out to the public next.
Yes, and here is where it gets really interesting, just from the sheer, surreal absurdity of the image. Federico Valverde, a physical specimen at the absolute peak of his career, is wheeled out of an accident and emergency ward in a wheelchair.
A wheelchair.
A wheelchair. Not because he tore an ACL in a Champions League final, not because he broke his leg making a heroic goal line clearance. He is in a wheelchair because of a workplace dispute on a Thursday morning.
It is unbelievable.
Sky Sports confirmed he was taken to the hospital, received his stitches, was run through the preliminary concussion checks, discharged the same day, and eventually returned to Valdebebas. But that visual, the vice captain of Real Madrid being pushed to a car in a wheelchair after a teammate assaulted him, is going to define this entire era of the club.
It is the ultimate, undeniable symbol of institutional dysfunction. And the club hierarchy understood instantly how catastrophic this was. You cannot spin this. You do not just put a bandage on the player, draft a generic PR tweet about a minor training knock, and move on.
No, they panic.
The institutional panic set in the moment Valverde hit the floor. Real Madrid's general manager, Jose Angel Sanchez, immediately convenes an emergency crisis cabinet. And their first action is straight out of a thriller. They literally lock down the environment.
Wait, like nobody in or out?
Exactly. The entire squad, the coaching staff, the medical team, everyone is locked in the dressing room. Nobody is allowed to leave the premises. They treated their own training facility like an active crime scene.
A hostage situation of their own making. Managing Madrid, Marca, AS, they're all corroborating this locked room scenario. President Florentino Perez personally launches an internal investigation before anyone is allowed to go home.
Yeah, they had to contain it.
The impending disciplinary action is expected to be massive. But before we even get to the punishments or the fallout, we have to pause and ask the most fundamental question. How does a routine training drill foul end with a world-class player unconscious and a multi-billion-dollar team under lock and key?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the answer is that Valdebebas was already a powder keg. This punch was just the match that finally found the fumes.
It was building up.
Exactly. This violent outburst was not a sudden, unpredictable aberration. It was the inevitable explosion of a season that had been in complete freefall for months.
Okay, to really grasp the gravity of this, we have to look at that freefall. We have to examine the rot at the Bernabeu, because you absolutely cannot divorce this isolated incident from the trophyless nightmare that Real Madrid is currently living.
No, you cannot. Context is everything here.
Let us set the sporting context for you. We are in early May. Real Madrid is staring down a season with 0 silverware. The Champions League dream is dead. And in La Liga, their bitter historic rivals, Barcelona, are sitting 11 points clear at the top of the table.
With barely any time left.
Right. There are only 4 games left to play in the entire season.
And the mathematical reality for Madrid is brutal. Barcelona only needs 1 single point from their remaining 4 matches to mathematically clinch the league title. Now look at the schedule.
Oh, the schedule's the worst part.
The very next match, taking place just days after this locker room brawl, is Sunday, May 11. It is El Clásico, Real Madrid versus Barcelona, and it is happening at the Santiago Bernabéu, Madrid's home stadium.
Which means the ultimate unforgivable humiliation is literally waiting on their doorstep. If Real Madrid does not win on Sunday, Barcelona gets to celebrate winning the La Liga title, potentially receiving a guard of honor, and lifting the championship trophy right there on Real Madrid's home pitch.
Right on their grass.
For a Madridista, for the players who wear that white shirt, that is the apocalyptic scenario. It is the ultimate loss of face. And now, per the reporting from Football España, both Valverde and Tchouaméni are expected to miss this critical match because of the fallout from the punch.
Which weakens them right when they need strength.
The team is tearing itself apart from the inside right at the exact moment they need absolute unity to defend the pride of their own stadium.
The pressure of that impending humiliation acts as a suffocating weight on the squad. I mean, when elite competitors know the season is mathematically lost, and they know the notoriously demanding fan base is going to turn on them, that collective anxiety often manifests as visceral aggression.
They lash out.
Exactly. They cannot take it out on the opponents who've already beaten them, so they take it out on each other. And the most alarming revelation in this entire dossier is that the Valverde-Tchouameni fight is not an isolated incident. It is part of a verified, ongoing pattern of violence within the squad.
Yes, the dossier points out that just weeks earlier, there was another serious physical altercation at training. This one involved the veteran center back Antonio Rudiger and the young left back Álvaro Carreras.
Another training ground fight.
Now, Carreras tried to play the PR game afterward. He went on Instagram, posted a smiling photo, and called the incident isolated and resolved. But it is clearly a glaring symptom of a much deeper disease infecting the culture. And what I find genuinely fascinating is how Rudiger attempted to fix the fracture.
Rudiger's approach was the classic old-school football remedy. He apologized for the physical altercation, and then he hosted a squad team lunch.
A team lunch.
Yes. The underlying philosophy there is that you break bread together. You share a meal, maybe bring the families, and you remember that you are a brotherhood outside the lines of the pitch.
I mean, it sounds nice on paper.
It is a noble, well-intentioned effort. But it speaks volumes about the systemic failure of the club's environment that a team lunch did absolutely nothing to prevent 2 other core players from putting each other in the hospital a few weeks later.
It is like trying to cure a shattered femur with a really nice ham sandwich. I mean, it is a lovely gesture, but it's totally ineffective against the actual pathology of the injury. Systemic toxicity requires a systemic cure, not catering.
Exactly.
And while all this violence and tension is tearing the squad apart, there is this bizarre, almost surreal side plot playing out simultaneously with Kylian Mbappé. We have to talk about the Mbappé circus because it perfectly illustrates the apathy and the totally warped reality of Real Madrid in 2026.
Oh, the Mbappé situation presents a statistical paradox that you will only ever witness at a club with the unique psychology of Real Madrid. Let us look at his sporting output on paper.
Let's see the numbers.
He has played 41 games this season across all competitions. He has scored 41 goals.
Wow.
A flawless mathematical ratio of 1 goal per game. If you drop those numbers into almost any other football club in the history of the sport, that player is elevated to untouchable, godlike status. Statues are commissioned.
Wait, hold on. Break down that math for me, because this is where my mind starts melting. The dossier reveals that there is an active, circulating Mbappé out petition among the fan base. And as of May 7, this petition has 30 million signatures.
30 million.
30 million. You were telling me a guy who averages a goal a game, playing in the most difficult leagues in the world, has a petition demanding his removal that is roughly the population size of Texas. Walk me through the fan psychology here. How does an elite goal scorer become so universally despised that 30 million people take time out of their day to demand he be sold?
Well, it forces us to confront the uniquely demanding, almost completely irrational culture of Real Madrid. At the Bernabeu, raw statistics do not buy you immunity. The fans do not just demand goals, they demand an emotional return on their investment.
They want passion.
Exactly. They demand total visible devotion to the badge. They demand a specific type of humility mixed with arrogance. And most importantly, they demand that your individual brilliance translates into major trophies.
And there are no trophies this year.
Right. Because Mbappe's 41 goals have not resulted in a La Liga title or a Champions League final, a massive segment of the fan base views his statistics as empty calories.
Empty calories, that makes sense.
They see him scoring hat-tricks against lower-table teams, but failing to lift the collective level of the squad when it matters most. But the true catalyst for that 30 million signature petition is his off-pitch behavior, which has completely alienated the faithful.
The apathy. That is the perfect word for it. Let's look at the contrast. The squad is literally burning to the ground. The defenders are brawling, the midfielders are punching each other into wheelchairs, the Clásico humiliation is looming over them like a dark cloud. And what does Kylian Mbappé do?
He leaves.
During his recent hamstring rehab period, instead of staying at Valdebebas to support the team or show solidarity, he decides to fly off to Sardinia for a mid-season holiday with his actress girlfriend, Esther Exposito.
Unbelievable timing.
Sky Sports reported that he returned from this luxury getaway mere minutes before kickoff for a league match against Espanyol.
And that specific sequence of events shatters the illusion of a unified team. Imagine being a Madrid fan paying exorbitant ticket prices. You see players brawling out of sheer frustration and desperation on one hand, and on the other hand, you see your highest paid star, the man brought in to be the ultimate difference maker, treating his injury rehab like a VIP vacation.
The resentment goes nuclear.
It absolutely does. It signals to the fans, and more dangerously to the rest of the locker room, a complete lack of accountability. If the star player does not care enough to suffer with the team, why should anyone else?
Yeah, why try?
There is also an unconfirmed rumor floating around, and we must be explicitly clear that the Dossier labels this as an unconfirmed report from Sky Sports that Mbappé got into a highly heated, disrespectful exchange with the coaching staff shortly after returning.
Interesting.
Whether that specific rumor is true or not, the fact that it is entirely believable shows how little authority the current staff holds over the dressing room.
Which brings us perfectly to the root cause of all this chaos. We have discussed the symptoms. The punches, the apathy, the petitions. But a dressing room, this fractured, does not happen overnight. It points directly to a massive systemic failure in leadership. Is the managerial vacuum.
Yeah, historically, when the culture of a football club rots this thoroughly, the boardroom always looks to the dugout first. The players hold the power, but the manager holds the responsibility.
Right.
Ondacero reports that the Madrid board is explicitly blaming the management structure for failing to handle these massive egos. And we have to trace the lineage of this failure. They already sacked Xabi Alonso earlier this season.
And he was supposed to be the guy.
Alonso was brought in as the brilliant tactical savior, the man who was going to modernize their play. But he was let go partly because he had a massive irreconcilable fallout with Vinicius Jr., Alonso may have had the tactical blueprint, but he lacked the political capital to manage the sprawling personalities.
So the board fires Alonso, the tactician, and they promote Álvaro Arbeloa to interim manager, hoping a former player can just steady the ship and act as a peacemaker. And we've already discussed his brilliant same-sweater team-building tactic that ended with a hospital visit for his vice-captain.
Yeah, that did not work out.
But Arbeloa's failure was entirely predictable. The dossier notes he has a long documented history of running disputes with his own players. He has clashed with Dani Ceballos. He has clashed with the veteran Dani Carvajal. He has clashed with Raúl Asensio.
He is a divisive figure himself.
He's not a stabilizing presence at all. He is just another point of friction in a machine that is already out of oil. It is universally accepted that he will be gone the second the season ends.
The club is currently operating as a luxury sports car, where the steering wheel has completely detached from the column while doing 150 miles an hour down the highway. The engine is still roaring. I mean, Mbappé is still scoring, but they are completely out of control, hurtling toward a concrete wall.
That is exactly what it feels like.
And when Real Madrid's hierarchy feels they have lost absolute control of the dressing room, they historically reach for the most extreme, authoritarian corrective measures available, which introduces the most massive, highly explosive rumor of the entire dossier.
Oh, this is easily my favorite part of the entire document. The return of the fire starter. The rumor, currently being reported by Tribuna and FMT, is that Jose Mourinho is being tipped as the primary replacement manager for next season.
This raises an important question regarding the psychological profiling of the club's leadership. What is the actual strategy here? There is an incredible, almost poetic irony to Madrid's potential solution.
Because it makes no sense on paper.
Exactly. You have a dressing room that is actively destroying itself through internal conflict, paranoia, physical violence, and toxicity. And the board's grand idea to fix this is to bring in Jose Mourinho.
The king of conflict.
This is a manager whose entire historical methodology is predicated on creating conflict. He builds his teams by establishing siege mentalities, picking fights with the media, picking fights with referees, and often deliberately picking fights with his own star players to test their loyalty. He thrives in toxicity. He considers it a motivational tool.
It is the equivalent of looking at a raging grease fire in your kitchen and deciding the best way to put it out is by throwing a bucket of gasoline on it and hoping it burns so hot it consumes itself.
That is exactly what it is.
Let's imagine Mourinho walking into this exact locker room. He demands absolute cult-like loyalty. If he senses the kind of detached apathy Mbappé showed by going to Sardinia, or the kind of insubordination Valverde and Tchouaméni showed by ignoring the club's code of conduct, he will not just find them quietly.
Oh no, he will go public.
He will publicly go to war with them in the press conferences. He will humiliate them to assert dominance.
It is the ultimate scorched earth policy. The Madrid hierarchy is clearly looking at this squad and concluding that player power has grown far too strong. They believe the culture cannot be gently corrected. It must be broken down to the studs and rebuilt.
And Mourinho is the wrecking ball.
Mourinho is the demolition crew. But bringing a manager with his specific psychological profile into a dressing room that is already physically brawling, it is a recipe for absolute sporting theater. It will be the most watched soap opera in global sports. But historically, Mourinho's volatile methods have a very short shelf life before the players burn out entirely.
To understand how Mourinho, or anyone, really might try to handle this mess, we have to look closely at the men who caused the mess. Let's zoom in on the combatants themselves. Because who exactly are the two men at the center of this hurricane?
Right, let's break them down.
They're at vastly different points in their careers, facing diverging arcs and dealing with incredibly desperate stakes. To understand how a handshake refusal turns into a hospital visit, you have to understand the specific psychological makeup of the individuals involved. Let us start with Federico Valverde, the journey from baby bird to the wheelchair.
Valverde is a deeply fascinating psychological study of how athletic aggression evolves. He is 27 years old right now, hitting what should be the absolute, undeniable peak of his physical and technical prime. He is the Uruguayan vice captain, a player trusted with massive responsibility.
Very respected.
And his nickname, Evolution, perfectly tracks his career trajectory and his changing self-image. When he first arrived at Real Madrid as a teenager, he was affectionately dubbed Pajarito, the baby bird.
Baby bird.
He was young, eager, energetic, constantly fluttering around the pitch trying to prove himself. But a few years ago, he consciously rejected that moniker. He rebranded himself as Halcon the Falcon.
That is quite the upgrade.
It was a clear statement of intent. He wanted to be viewed as the predator, the aggressive, dominant, sweeping force in the midfield who dictates the terms of engagement.
And for a brief shining moment this season, the Falcon was absolutely soaring. Let us not forget the context of his season. Just 8 weeks prior to this incident, on March 11th, Valverde experienced what is arguably an incredible career high.
Yeah, a massive night for him.
He scored his first ever career hat-trick, and he did it against Manchester City in the Champions League round of 16. Think about the adrenaline high of that specific moment. You are the undisputed hero of the Santiago Bernabéu, dismantling the Premier League champions on the biggest stage in club football.
He was on top of the world.
And literally 8 weeks later, that exact same player is being wheeled out of a hospital with stitches in his head after a workplace fistfight with a coworker. The sheer whiplash of that arc, the speed of the descent is dizzying.
It is a profound, sudden fall from grace. But if you look objectively at his history, the raw aggression that makes him so successful on the pitch has not always been channeled perfectly off it. The dossier points out his past disciplinary issues, which establish a clear behavioral pattern.
There is a history here.
Back in 2017, he was officially investigated by FIFA during the Under-20 World Cup for making a controversial gesture during a celebration. And much more recently, in 2023, there was the highly publicized incident where he allegedly waited by the team buses and punched a Villarreal player in the stadium car park after a highly contentious match.
The car park incident, right.
Now, it is important to state that the car park case was ultimately dismissed by the authorities, but it establishes a clear precedent in the public consciousness. When Valverde feels deeply provoked, aggrieved, or perceives a slight against his honor, his reaction can bypass verbal argument and manifest as visceral, physical confrontation.
The Falcon has talents, and history shows he is not afraid to use them when he feels threatened. Which brings us to the man who actually threw the knockout punch, Aurélien Tchouameni, the anchor turned aggressor.
Tchouameni's psychological profile is entirely different from Valverde's, which makes his role as the aggressor here so surprising. He is 25 years old, and he plays as the double pivot anchor for both Real Madrid and the French national team.
Break down that role a bit for us.
Sure. For those unfamiliar with the tactical jargon, the double pivot is essentially the central nervous system of a modern football team. It requires two defensive midfielders to operate in perfect telepathic synchronicity. You have to constantly read your partner's movements, cover the spaces they leave behind, and trust them implicitly.
It requires a lot of calm focus.
Exactly. Tchouameni is generally viewed as a highly cerebral, stabilizing presence. He is the calm center of the midfield storm. He was even handed the captain's armband for France back in 2024. We all remember his defining legacy from the 2022 World Cup.
Oh, yeah, the goal against England.
Right. He scored that unbelievable sweeping goal against England from outside the box, and he was nearly the solo hero of the final against Argentina. He's supposed to be the mature, calculated tactician.
Yet here he is, throwing a devastating knockout punch in the locker room, completely destroying the trust required to play his position. And there is an incredibly spicy transfer angle woven into this too.
Ah, the Manchester United rumor.
Yes. Multiple outlets, including highly reliable ones, are reporting that Manchester United has identified Tchouaméni as a primary summer transfer target to rebuild their own midfield. I mean, we have seen unhappy players try to force moves to new clubs before.
All the time.
We've seen them hand in formal transfer requests, refuse to turn up to training, or give controversial unauthorized interviews to foreign press. But punching your own club vice captain so hard his head splits open on a table, that is a highly unorthodox way to submit your resignation. It is a hell of an audition for the legendary physicality of the Premier League, I will give him that.
It highlights just how desperate and distorted the atmosphere at Valdebebas has become. Players who are historically composed, players who are trusted to be the tactical brain of the team, are snapping violently under the strain of the toxic environment.
Right.
And what makes this singular punch so much bigger than just a Real Madrid soap opera is the timing. Because this is not just a domestic Spanish football problem anymore. This single moment of violence has a direct, immediate, and potentially devastating impact on the biggest sporting event on the planet, which kicks off in just a few weeks.
The 2026 World Cup ripple effects are massive, and they are spreading fast.
Very fast.
Let us expand on that global fallout, because this is where the 48-hour timeline gets incredibly stressful for two major geopolitical football powers. Let us look at France's dilemma first. The timing of this punch could not possibly be worse for the French Football Federation.
It is the worst-case scenario.
Didier Deschamps, the legendary French manager, is scheduled to announce his final official World Cup squad in exactly 6 days.
May 13th. For Deschamps, this is an absolute unmitigated nightmare. This is widely expected to be his final tournament in charge of the French national team, his swan song. And over the last 4 years, he has meticulously built his entire tactical system around Tchouameni.
He needs him.
He views him as the absolute, unquestionable lock for that double pivot role alongside Eduardo Camavinga. From a purely sporting, tactical perspective, Tchouameni simply has to be on that plane to North America. But the optics of the selection are suddenly toxic.
You're selecting a player to represent your nation, to wear the crest, to be a global ambassador for France just 6 days after he put his own club teammate in the hospital with a brutal punch.
The media will eat him alive.
The press conference on May 13 is going to be a complete bloodbath. The French media, who are notoriously relentless, are not going to ask Deschamps about his pressing triggers against Senegal. They're going to spend 45 minutes demanding to know if the national team manager condones locker room violence and if a player under police or internal club investigation is fit to represent the youth of France.
And it is not just a PR nightmare. There is a very legitimate sporting risk attached to this. Real Madrid is almost certainly going to suspend Tchouaméni for this assault.
Oh, obviously.
If he is banned from all club activities, banned from training, and banned from playing the remaining league matches, his match sharpness completely plummets. France plays their crucial group stage opener against Senegal in New Jersey on June 16th. Will Tchouaméni be match fit and ready for the physical intensity of a World Cup, or will he be sluggish and rusty from a month of forced exile?
That is a huge risk.
Furthermore, you have to factor in the Mbappé dynamic. Both Tchouaméni and Mbappé will be in that French squad. While club drama does not always automatically translate to the national team environment, the massive media circus surrounding both of them, Mbappé's 30 million signature petition and Tchouaméni's assault charge, will follow them across the Atlantic.
They will not be able to escape it.
Exactly. It will be a massive daily distraction for a team trying to maintain the extreme focus required to win a World Cup.
It is a media circus France absolutely does not need right now. But if you look across the Atlantic to South America, the panic in Uruguay is just as real and arguably more urgent regarding the physical health of their star.
Uruguay's in a tough spot.
Let us talk about Uruguay's midfield engine being in serious jeopardy. Under the management of Marcelo Bielsa, Uruguay has evolved into a terrifying prospect for any opponent. They are no longer just plucky underdogs. They are dangerous, legitimate dark horses to win the whole tournament.
Oh, they are very strong right now.
They actually beat both Argentina and Brazil during the grueling South American qualifying campaign, which is an incredible achievement.
And Federico Valverde is the absolute irreplaceable beating heart of Bielsa's tactical system. For those who do not follow Bielsa, his philosophy is nicknamed Murder Ball for a reason.
Murder Ball, right. Explain that.
He demands high-intensity, relentless pressing, man-to-man marking all over the pitch, and rapid, exhausting transitions. He treats his players like machines, weighing them constantly and demanding peak physiological perfection. 442 magazine ranks Valverde as the #4 central midfielder in the entire world right now, purely because of his incredible physical engine. He is the only player capable of executing Bielsa's demands flawlessly for 90 minutes.
So, hearing the news that the engine of their national team is being wheeled out of a hospital is a legitimate national emergency for Uruguay.
It absolutely is.
Now, the dossier notes that the physical injury from the table, the cut, the stitches on his head that will heal relatively quickly, that is superficial. That is not the main issue keeping Bielsa awake at night.
No, stitches are fine.
The issue is the concussion protocol resulting from that brief loss of consciousness on the locker room floor. You do not mess around with brain injuries in modern sports. It is not like taping up a sprained ankle and playing through the pain. He could be mandated to be sidelined from all physical training for weeks just to clear the baseline medical protocol safely.
Exactly. Combine the strict medical protocols with the inevitable club suspension he will likely face for instigating the hostility and refusing the handshake, and Valverde is effectively stripped of all his competitive minutes right before the biggest tournament of his life begins.
Right.
Bielsa needs his players arriving at the pre-tournament camp at the absolute peak of their physical conditioning, running like well-oiled machines. If Valverde arrives in the United States undercooked, having missed a month of competitive football and intense training, Uruguay's entire tactical setup is severely compromised.
It changes everything for them.
The ripple effect of that single punch could alter the trajectory of their entire World Cup campaign.
The stakes are incredibly high, and the stress levels for both national federations are off the charts. But looking at the tournament structure, my mind immediately jumps to the ultimate explosive hypothetical clash. Because of the way the World Cup knockout bracket is structured based on group seedings, it is entirely mathematically possible that France and Uruguay meet in the knockout stages.
Oh, that would be wild.
Think about the narrative potential here. Think about the cinematic drama. What happens if France and Uruguay face off in the quarterfinal?
It would instantly become the most anticipated, highly charged midfield battle of the entire tournament, perhaps of the decade. You would have Tchouaméni and Valverde, two men who literally drew blood from each other in May, lining up in the tunnel in June.
Oh man, the tension.
They would be standing shoulder to shoulder, wearing their national colors, competing for a spot in the World Cup semifinals. The media frenzy leading up to that match would be deafening. Every single tackle, every look, every foul between them in the midfield would be hyper-scrutinized for malice and retribution.
The referee would have an impossible job.
The referee assigned to that match would be under immense, unprecedented pressure to keep control of the game. It would completely transcend tactics. It would be deeply, dangerously personal. The punch heard around the world would become the defining narrative of the match, overshadowing everything else.
It is the kind of sports drama that Hollywood scriptwriters would reject for being too unrealistic and heavy-handed, yet we are watching it unfold in real time via these verified reports.
It really is stranger than fiction.
So let us take a breath and recap the sheer density of this incredible 48-hour sequence. We started with the simple, everyday training foul. It escalated into a premeditated refused handshake, a disastrous, psychologically flawed managerial attempted forced bonding, an accusation of a press leak, and finally, a brutal knockout punch.
A lot happened in 2 days.
We have Federico Valverde going from a Champions League hat-trick hero to leaving Valdebebas in a wheelchair. We have Kylian Mbappé oblivious in Sardinia while 30 million people sign a petition for his immediate removal. We have an entire multi-billion-dollar squad locked in a dressing room, a trophyless season culminating in a humiliating Clásico, and 2 massive national teams holding their breath just days before their World Cup squads are announced.
The sheer density of the chaos is exactly what makes this dossier so compelling to study. It touches every single facet of the modern game. Unchecked player power, severe managerial incompetence, the immense pressure of global media, the fragile psychology of elite athletes, and the geopolitical stakes of international football.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? When we look at everything we have unpacked today, from the boardroom to the hospital room, I think it provides a masterclass in how institutional failure operates.
Definitely.
It proves that a toxic culture at the very top, a failure of management to establish boundaries, a failure of the board to set standards inevitably, always leads to chaos at the bottom. It does not matter how talented the individuals are. It does not matter if you have strikers who score 41 goals or world-class midfielders who dominate the Champions League.
Talent cannot outrun culture.
Exactly. If the environment they operate in is poisoned, the talent will eventually turn on itself. The pressure has to escape somewhere, and if there is no leadership to guide it, it escapes through violence.
It is a stark reminder that football clubs, regardless of their billion-dollar valuations, are at their core simply human ecosystems. And this particular ecosystem at the Santiago Bernabéu is critically ill. Which leaves us with a fascinating, slightly terrifying prospect as we look toward the summer.
What is that?
If this is how the world's most elite athletes handle the pressure of a failing club season, if this is the violent reality of what happens when they are surrounded by the comforts of their home city and their club salaries, what happens when they face off with the weight of their entire nations on their shoulders in just a few weeks?
That is a great question.
The real explosion might not have happened at Valdebebas. It might be waiting for us at the World Cup.